That was really beautiful. Thank you, Joseph. Today's reading comes from an interview with Devon Price, the author of Laziness Does Not Exist. Price is a psychologist, a teacher, and uses they/them pronouns. The word lazy first appeared in English in the 1540s, and it was used to mean someone who disliked work or effort. Many etymologists believe that it came from either the Middle Low German lach, which meant feeble or weak, or from the Old English lesu, which meant false or evil. The idea that lazy people are weak and lack motivation, making them morally corrupt and evil, is still with us today. Many of the things we call laziness, such as procrastination, are often driven by perfectionism and anxiety. When we look at someone who won't get started on a research paper because they're super anxious and don't know how to begin, even though they care a great deal about getting the job done perfectly, we call them lazy. This idea that laziness is a moral failing comes into play when we look at cultural attitudes towards disability, drug addiction, and homelessness. 3 areas in which people are often blamed individually for the problems that society has created. The laziest lie is a belief system that says hard work is morally superior to relaxation, and that people who are not productive have less innate value than productive people. It's an unspoken yet commonly held set of beliefs and values. It affects how we work, how we set limits in our relationships, and our views on what life is supposed to be about. There are 3 core beliefs that drive society's hatred of laziness. 1, your worth is your productivity. This idea is problematic on a fundamental level, and also because, for example, children, the elderly, the disabled, and people with depression can't always be productive. Those lives still have innate value. And if you think working hard and getting a lot done is how you earn your right to be alive, you're always going to be taking on more than is healthy for you. When we're struggling, we're not productive. The idea that our productivity is connected to our worth makes us easy to exploit. Number 2, you cannot trust your feelings or limits. Because productivity is the most important thing, you're supposed to ignore or downplay anything that gets in the way of productivity. If I feel tired in the middle of the day, I beat myself up over it, or I tell myself that being tired doesn't make sense. I haven't earned a break yet because I haven't gotten enough done. This is a risky thought process because it leads us to have a distorted sense of those signals. We don't trust the feelings of needing to stop working because we assume that they make us a bad person. This can erode our health when people don't get enough breaks, and they're also at an elevated risk for burnout. Number 3, there's always more you could be doing. This one is particularly dangerous because it comes down to much more than just work. There are many realms of life that we can be made to feel guilty about where we can feel like we're not enough. Notice if you think of rest and self-care as only a means to making yourself more productive. As long as you're thinking like that, you're still measuring your life in a conditional way. Wasting time is a necessary part of life. Basic human needs in our lives can be defined by our values, our relationships, and the things that give us pleasure, rather than guilt, shame, and productivity, or trying to earn our right to be alive. There's no such thing as earning the right to be alive. We all deserve to be happy and comfortable, no matter what we do or don't do. That was lovely. Thank you so much. My friend Travis Bedard is an actor and director. One of his mantras that I've taken on for myself is create the art you want to see in the world. Today, I am creating the worship service I need to see in the world. This congregation cares about issues of economic justice. I see it in the work that we do, the organizations we support with our offerings, and even some of the services that we hold. Recently, Terry Lohman did a sermon on income inequality. However, so many of the services we do about economic justice are on the outside looking in, as opposed to from the inside looking out. I'm going to change that up a little. Have you ever noticed that we define ourselves by work? Hi, my name is Andy Arthur. I'm a teacher, a playwright, and the executive director of the South Florida Theater League. That's my general introduction, my name and my free sources of income. I could switch this up a bit. Hi, my name is Andy Arthur. I have a loud and distinctive laugh. I live with a very messy cat, and I like to read historical mysteries. Those are three very distinctive things about me, but it would feel weird to introduce myself to someone this way, because there's an unspoken value that what you do is who you are. Take a moment to think about how you introduce yourself. Now, this might be a space where our retired folks shine. My dad retired this year, and I'm not sure how he introduces himself. He could be, hi, I'm Brian Arthur. I'm a Democrat, a reader of science fiction, and a fan of Ohio State football. Though due to COVID, I'm pretty sure he's not introducing himself to anybody these days. But think about it. We ask children what they want to be when they grow up. And that means what they will do for a living, to earn a living. If a kid answered, when I grow up, I want to be happy, would that be enough? Or would you have a follow-up question? In their book, Laziness Does Not Exist, Devon Price examines what they call the laziness lie, a foundational belief system that underpins a lot of systemic injustice in our society. I read from an interview Price gave earlier today that details the three basics of the laziness lie. Your worth is your productivity, you cannot trust your own limits, and there's always more you could be doing. Our capitalistic society defines our worth by our productivity and has used that belief to perpetuate a lot of injustice, including slavery, institutionalization, and the sterilization of disabled people. This belief is still used to justify our treatment of the homeless, the poor, and people with mental health issues. The idea that your worth is your productivity is toxic and very prevalent. It underpins the gutting of social safety nets. If people work hard, they won't need help. It's profoundly ableist, assuming that everyone has the physical and mental abilities to be extremely productive. And it helps perpetuate the myth that the rugged individual can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, ignoring the need to look at the world through a community lens. And it's everywhere. How many people do you know who pride themselves on how busy they are? Have you ever prided yourself on how busy you are? And productivity doesn't just have to mean income-driven work. It can be housework, it can be parenting, it can be activism, it can be volunteering, it can be all these things combined. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism is that we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Inherent worth and dignity, not earned. And yet, I've seen the idea that our worth is connected to our productivity in this very congregation. For a small community, we pride ourselves on how much programming we're able to do and always think of ways to do more things, more workshops, more activism, more. But what if we considered doing less with more instead of more with less? The next part of the laziness lie is that you cannot trust your own limits. This is where I get into trouble. I want to do all the things. I am an overcommitter. Part of this is that I work in the nonprofit industry where we are trained to always say yes to another opportunity. Because what happens if you let something go and it could have been the thing that would have saved the organization? It's also part of the pernicious concept that if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I love all three of my jobs. They're also a lot of work. And I do them for less pay than I would receive for a more traditional white-collar career path. But I also don't feel comfortable setting boundaries around any of my jobs. If my students need my time, well, they're taking on a great deal of debt to learn from me. They're also in a bad financial situation, and I like helping them. If an actor or a member of the theater community needs my time, well, they're paying membership dues so that I can serve them. And if there are not enough hours in the week for me to get to everyone's needs, that's my fault. On theater Twitter, someone recently said, "The show must go on" is a threat, not an inspirational statement. I feel that in my bones. Over the past month, I developed a rash on my face and over my eyes, causing me to look like a red raccoon with sideburns. The earliest I could get to see my dermatologist without disrupting my work schedule was February 11th. Because I couldn't not do my jobs. I'm expected at class, I'm expected at meetings, I'm expected at workshops. It doesn't matter that my eyes are swelling and my face is itchy. I can just I can push through until I can get to the dermatologist. It took one of my high school students consistently telling me that I needed to go to the doctor for me to go to urgent care this Thursday. I'm feeling a lot better, but the idea that the show must go on is so imprinted on me that I don't know my own limitations. And because I'm the only employee at 2 of my jobs, I know that if I don't do things, they won't get done. But I also know that I can hit a point where I am doing so much that I feel overwhelmed and shut down. And that's happened a lot more since the pandemic started. But I don't feel comfortable saying no. What if I get fired? What if I disappoint people that I love and respect? No one in specific is asking for very much, but in aggregate, it can be a lot more than I can handle. Think about yourself. Are you good about setting boundaries in your work? Are you good about setting boundaries in your activism and volunteering, in your personal life? Or do you find that you don't know when you surpassed your limits until you have? I've been exploring this at the personal level, but the idea that people cannot trust their limits also allows for some of the worst worker injustices out there. The gig economy in specific is set up to exploit this. If you don't have limits, then you don't need to be concerned about meal breaks or bathroom breaks. The idea of not knowing your limits also intersects with other systemic injustices. For example, the idea of the second shift is the parenting and housework that women take on in heterosexual relationships, where they're essentially doing a second job in addition to working full-time. But how do you say no to your own children, or say yes to living in a messy house? It doesn't take that much effort to vacuum or wash the dishes or keep the mental calendar going, right? The third part of the laziness lie is that there's always more you could be doing. How many times over the past decade have I berated myself for not yet learning Spanish, for only text banking and not phone banking during election cycles, for not writing enough, for not getting enough done at work before stopping? Price says that a lot of the time when we feel the most lazy is when we're doing too much. Our bodies know the score, and those times when we loaf are ways of healing. There are studies that have been done that show that we can only do about 3 to 4 productive hours of mindful work each day, and yet we have an 8-hour workday, and some people have much longer workdays than that. And you can see where the belief that you can always do more intersects toxically with the concept that you shouldn't respect your own limits. How many times in your own life have you thought to yourself, I could do that, and the other thing? Our whole culture is built on the ideal of exponential growth. If you're in a career, you're expected to take on more duties, learn more skills, and justify your salary through your growth as a worker. And this idea of laziness, that people who aren't constantly doing more, justifies white supremacy culture. In preparing for this service, Joseph emailed me a story about the history of colonial Mozambique, where after slavery was outlawed, it was still legal to press Black Africans into manual labor because it was thought that hard work was good for the soul. It wasn't slavery. It was helping these people's souls. The idea that hard work is good for you is baked into a lot of racism towards Black people. It's an underpinning of white supremacy culture and affects policy, such as means testing for social safety nets, or how hard it is for people to access unemployment benefits that they have already paid into while they were working. So what can we do about it? First off, we can recognize when we're buying into the idea of the laziness lie. That can be about ourselves, when we fail to set appropriate boundaries, we expect we can do all the things, when we believe our worth is through what we do and not who we are. I recognize that the cat meditation we did earlier today was silly, but I think the idea of becoming a cat when you need to is a good one. Unlike dogs, cats aren't workers. Cats just are. At the bottom of the screen, you can see Houdini. I am his human. Houdini doesn't contribute to society. He sleeps, he eats, he drops cat fur in huge amounts of clumps no matter how much I brush him. He purrs, he demands cuddles, he hates men, and sometimes he runs across my apartment like he's being chased by a ghost. None of this is productive. It has no inherent value. But I love him. He's been my constant companion for the past 12 years, and I hope I get 12 more with him. His worth isn't in how much he does for me, but just in who he is. We all need to allow ourselves to cat more often. Listen to the nap ministry. Take time to rest. What else can we do? We can recognize that when we think someone is lazy in our lives, we're often missing some of their context. Look at the why something isn't happening. Is the person dealing with mental illness or a death in the family? Is the pandemic taking a major emotional toll? If you're frustrated about someone in a customer service situation, maybe there are not enough employees in the store to handle the amount of work of the business. If someone seems lazy to you, approach the situation with curiosity and grace. However, while the laziness lie supports systemic problems, we can't dismantle it or any systemic issues on our own. So what else can we do? In her essay, Capitalism Sucks, But Don't Be Shamed for Your Hustle, Ulujima Ulu writes, yes, we must care for ourselves in a world that tells us it's wrong to do so. But the individualism that tells us that society revolution lies in our own individual bettering alone, even if it is our emotional and spiritual bettering, is also the product of capitalism. Capitalism seeks to take us away from the collective care that can ensure our ability to survive and thrive outside of capitalist systems. The desire to find solutions to systemic exploitation that begin and end with how that exploitation impacts us as individuals will allow those systems to continue to exploit. We cannot solve any systemic problems alone. We need networks of mutual aid. We need to embrace the idea of collective care. And we need to acknowledge that rugged individualism will not get us out of any of the major problems of our time. You alone cannot solve global warming, no matter how much you cut down your carbon footprint. We, as a worldwide community, can. In their book, Price talks about the often shared Edmund Burke quote, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. They note that the quote teaches us that taking action of any kind is doing good, that doing is always better than not doing. But Price points out it's a misquote. The actual quote is, when bad men combine, the good must dissociate, otherwise they will fail, one by one, in an unpitied sacrifice of contemptible struggle. It's not hard work of individuals that will save us, but rather joining as a community and mutual support. Does good resist evil? Price tells us we don't have to be heroes, and we don't constantly need to go, go, go. We can take a step back and cultivate relationships. We can learn to trust other people and stop judging ourselves and others for being lazy. And this will make us more resilient because we are stronger together than we are apart.